You are listening to the We Need to Talk About Oscar podcast, and these are our interviews with Tolga Karacelik and Natalie Kingston, the director and cinematographer of The Shallow Tale of a Writer Who Decided to Write About a Serial Killer, premiering at this year's Tribeca.
Well, there's sometimes kind of like a bullshit saying that the loneliest person on the set is the director, which I totally do not agree. I think these are the people that are trying to make your dreams come true. They are the ones that are trying to make it happen. So I do believe in collaboration and I do believe in listening as much as talking.
So I thought about the idea of letting the city, New York itself at night, ooze itself into the interior world, this world of Shallow Tale.
To start us off, could you tell us a little bit about where your love for movies came from and how you got into filmmaking?
It's a strange process for me because I was more focused on writing and especially poetry and stuff like that. And I was not focusing much on cinema or movies. And my love for movies started after I was actually 20 years old. I think it started with a Turkish movie called Tabutta Röveşata. I don't know the English name, that's Zaim's film in 1990s. And also with Taxi Driver. And then I started watching movies constantly. Then I fell in love with lighting, to be honest with you. That's where Peter Greenaway came to my life. And I started watching lighting in the movies the beginning. Then I started shooting short films. That's when I started to fall in love with crafts, actually. That was in New York when I was 22 years old. And then I think my creative focus had been only writing and thinking movies.
Could it be that this isn't just your first English language feature film, but in general, your first project not in Turkish?
I had shot short films before, but it's the first time that I wrote and directed in English. Like the other three movies that I had were always in Turkish.
How did you know that the time has come to try it in a different language as well?
There's no time for that. It's like the story needs what story needs. The story had kind of like a serial killer, the marriage consultant, which is more kind of like an Atlantic based issues, not so much continental Europe, not Balkans, not Turkish, not Middle Eastern, not Japanese, not Chinese. It's more either States or England, maybe if you force it a little bit. So that's how it started. The context of the story made me shoot this in New York. And also, I love New York and I learned filmmaking here. So I always had this idea of trying to give something back to New York. So that's how the natural setting of the story had become New York City.
I already feel a little bit stupid for saying it because it's such a generic thing to say, but this film's ensemble is such an inspired casting as a whole. I mean, Steve Buscemi, a seasoned veteran, a true legend, John Magaro, who's been around for quite some time, turning in some wonderful performances, and it feels like his latest Past Lives could have been his breakout role. And then we have Brit Lauer, who came to the attention of a wider audience with the Ben Stiller directed hit TV show Severance. Yeah. So to circle back a little bit to the change in language, how did this affect the casting process? For which, of course, kudos to the casting team as well. And what impact did this have on your sense of responsibility?
Well, you always have the full responsibility as a director, and when you're a writer of the story and also the script, like all the movies that I had written and directed had also been written the stories by myself too. So more than the actors, choosing the actors, you have that responsibility all throughout the movie. And understanding what you want as an actor, what kind of an actors that you want to work with, and is they, as you said, good job and the done by the casting director, Susan Shopmaker and Randy Glass, our team, casting team. And I fell in love with Brit the moment I saw her. and she was so Susie. And John Magaro, I had his picture on my writing desk while I was writing it, a picture of him from the first cow. I always had him, but of course, like being able to work with them at the end, and not only them too, like all these small and big other characters that are in the movie are, I think, all really good actors. And like I love the audition process for them. And now it's my fourth movie, and I love working with actors. When you see a good actor, you understand that's a good actor. So the good thing that you do, the best thing that you can do as a director is, if you want good performances, the key is getting to work with good actors, and they were all good actors. So it makes your job and life so easier. With Steve Buscemi, I don't need to say anything. It's like beyond my wildest dreams to be able to work with Steve Buscemi. Like there were times after Steve would said, "Yeah, I will come," and he's the nicest person on earth, by the way. Like he's 150% more than what you hear about him, about the goodness and kindness of him, and such a beautiful brain also. And being able to create with him, it was a blast. So also, like after he said yes to the project, I was like waking up, and I was realizing time to time saying that, oh my God, Steve Buscemi is gonna act in my movie. Like this is this is crazy. Like so, thanks to our producers, thanks to our casting directors, this is a collateral thing. Like them coming and believing in the script, them be hearing about the script, them being represented to them as what you had done before, etc., is all part of a big team.
And in story-wise, we have a relationship between Keen and Susie that's crumbling, and a relationship between Keen and Kolmik that's forming in the weirdest, most unhealthy way possible. And then these two relationships collide, or at least meet, with John's character, Keen, in the middle of it all, still struggling with his writing. How did the meeting of all these parts of the story evolve throughout the process?
It's a movie about a triangle. If you look at the blocking of the actors also throughout the movie, I'm always creating a triangle to make it a duo. You need a third to become a couple. So it's like they're switching. In the last scene when she says shut up and Steve and John is behind, Brit is in front, then the therapy is always triangles while they're speaking. If there are only two people, they are usually side to side. So with the audience, you're also a triangle. So I always framed everything in triangles. I was thinking about triangles all throughout the movie. So Keen, I started creating the character Keen after I think the Grand Jury Award at Sundance with my last film. I realized that I was taking myself a little bit too serious maybe right now. Like I didn't want to let that go over my head. So Keen character had evolved in that sense. So he was always, my middle name is Kenan, and my main characters are usually Kenan. That's why I named them. This time it was in English, so I named Keen. So from Keen, then came the character of Brit. I watched Tutu, watching my wife Tutu, her name is Tuğçe, I call her Tutu, watching a TV show about a personal organizer. Then Brit's private organizer thing came in. And by the way, I always create the female character's name Susie also. In the last Butterflies, it was Kenan, Susie. So here is Keen and Susie. And so my female character is usually called Susan and Susie. So it was always about making a couple with the help of the third. And from which perspective are we seeing them right now? So I try to frame everything according to that too. It's not the triangle of sadness though. I love Ruben Östlund, by the way.
Now that you talked about casting and the characters, the actors, then we have some other wonderful people whom we cannot go without acknowledging. The crew, which is just as important as the actors. And putting together your team behind the camera must have come with just as much pressure, but you ended up with super talented individuals like the DP, Natalie Kingston, Lance Mitchell, the production designer, but for example, in the editing room, returning face, as far as I know, Aaron Luz. And then, of course, you have a sound team, costumes, the music department, and so on. How did all this come together piece by piece? And how did you balance or harmonize your previous collaborators with the new ones?
Well, there's sometimes kind of like a bullshit saying that the loneliest person on the set is the director, which I totally do not agree. I think these are the people that are trying to make your dreams come true. They are the ones that are trying to make it happen. So I do believe in collaboration and I do believe in listening as much as talking. And because I write and direct the story, I know my characters. I know the light that I want. So tell me something else. Tell me what you see. That's how we start with it. With Natalie Kingston, the first time I met with her, she was the first TP that I interviewed. And I just wrote to our producers, she is the one. We're going with her. And with Lance, I loved working with Natalie. I loved working with Lance. I really loved working with this crew, from our grip to electrician, from DIT to set design to everyone was great really on the set. And I'm quite a positive person on the set too. I'm happy with like a 5 year old kid while I'm on the set. Actually, let me tell you something. My mom called me once and she asked me how I was while I was shooting butterflies. And I said, just like a penguin. I'm happy like a penguin. She said, what does it mean? All the things that make me floppy on the land makes me go fast in the sea, on the set. So all my flows are making me, I'm happy on the set generally. So Natalie, we were able to work for a long time, which I also really enjoyed because I always shoot things super fast. So I need to be organized. Also, we're shooting in New York. You have to be organized. And she's also a control freak like me. So we were on the same page from the beginning. Lance also, when I just interviewed Lance, I just told our producers, no, he is the one. And then we stopped looking at other people. So also that happened with our location manager also. Like I loved everybody that I worked with here. And I was talking with our location scout about the drum of the scene, for example. So they know what I'm looking for. Maybe I'm telling something, but they had always been, everyone has been creatively engaged in the project, which is the way that I love creating. It's a collective thing. You're not only one person. I love that beauty in creating together.
Absolutely. And I think it would be a shame not to talk about the title itself. The shallow tale of a writer who decided to write about a serial killer.
Yeah.
Now, how descriptive can a title be?
My producers had quite a hard time accepting it. And I told them, so I will come up with another name. I'll give you a choice. So either choose that one or choose this one. So at the end, they chose.
And you gave the worst possible choice, right?
Oh, yeah, I think that was all right too. The other title that we worked on, I gave them to work on was the best movie of the year. So,
Love it.
it's modest though. It's not the best movie. Come on, it's the best movie of the year. So they said, let's
be humble, right?
Yes. I always had this title while I was writing the story. Like I always had one syllable names until now, like toll booth, ivy, butterflies. I think it's time to gear up the game for me with the names. And you can't say it when you're drunk. Believe me, I tried. No,
I believe you. Back to our heroes. John's character, Keen, as you are insisting to characters' names and so on, it must be somewhat personal, as it's your middle name as well. So Keen is a writer who is, to put it mildly, not the most productive writer. Of course, you do not only direct films, but you direct your own screenplays. I don't want to insinuate anything, but does this character or character description have anything to do with you or your own writing process?
I can say this as much as I can say about this without ruining the character or the movie for the audiences, that when my wife watched the movie, I think there were some scenes that she found quite familiar to what she had seen before. And yeah, like you're writing those characters. So all those characters are having parts of you in them. I do have Susie, Great Susie in me. I do have Colmick also. I do have the llama guy. I do have the absurdity of the Albanian mobster. But like Keen is not a kind of like that a big of a secret when I told you that Keen and Kenan about my middle name. Yes, of course. The reason that Keen had came up, I guess I can only predict and I can only like guess that it came up from the need to pull down my ability and potential to take myself seriously. I don't like taking myself seriously. You can hear that in the name of the movie too, the shallow tale it is. So I think our generation is creating more freely when we don't take ourselves that much serious.
There's this sequence where Colmick is knocking everyone out with the butt of his gun, like there can't be any consequences. And I had this feeling for the entirety of the film that no matter what happened, it just wasn't that unrealistic. Dare I say, it felt grounded. I'm not saying anything new with this, but it's one messed up world that we live in.
It is.
How do you get by in your everyday life with all this going on? And to what extent can you process this through your art?
Well, the thing is, what we're trying to do here is kind of like, I think I do take them lightly in a way, like I do take myself and try to make a movie that looks like 5-year-old kids are acting in it, kind of like the characters. So when I shot Ivy, that time of Turkey was politically so just before the Gezi protests. So it was a little bit hardcore politically too. So I did this political movie thriller called Ivy that takes place in a bulk carrier in a ship in all the movie. So I realized that when I'm shooting something and addressing the evil, let's say, we're cementing it. I got a power to make people hear what I want to say. And the way I like doing it by raising their curtains, open their kind of like the walls. And there are two things that you can do it with: comedy or surprising them. I do use those elements in my art, I think, a lot. So just to surprise and open up the thing, and then you get inside, and then we talk about so, and then you make them hear what you want to say in a different way. So analyzing and getting dark really all the time is sometimes, at least this part of my life, is a little bit with this world. I think I'm more, just because of things that you said, more drawn to the comedy and dark comedy side to creating. I think if we were living in a much more calm, really happy, more social democratically and liberally open, kind of like a world, most probably I'll be starting making dark movies to shock people more. But like, I think it's what's drawing me to comedy and dark comedy, especially, is just the reason that you just told me.
Another thing about Kolmik is that at some point in the film, he finds himself as Susie and Keen's marriage counselor, which is, well, not exactly his specialty. Obviously, the earlier in your career you are, and as a filmmaker, and the smaller the budget is, the more roles you have to fulfill in order for your film to be completed. What was or what has been a moment in your career where you felt the most underqualified for a job or a part of the job?
In my directing life?
Yeah.
You basically asked me what I suck at?
But you did suck at before. You can be the best at it nowadays.
Well, the strange thing is that I never had become, I started with just being a director. I'd never been on set before. Like,
really?
Yes, I never been on set in any other people's set I'd never been on. Like, I started as a short film director. I shot 5 or 6, I think, short films. And then I started making feature films with the Tollbooth. And I remember just after Tollbooth, which premiered in New York MoMA, is in the archives of MoMA, and it went to Warsaw Film Festival, etc., etc. So and receives really good awards in national and international festivals. And then I went to the set of my friend who was shooting this big budget for Turkey standards, but like kind of like a commercial film. And me shooting 6 shorts, then a feature film that got the all important awards in Antalya Film Festival, like best first film, best actor, best cinematography. So I was the coming Turkish director. So I went to his set and then I just witnessed his talking with the DP. The DP said, while we're panning like this, if we pan like this wall is really creating a problem. We are losing like 2 seconds of the shot with this wall. And he said, break it down. And I was like, oh my God, can we break down walls? So that's, I didn't know that we could break down walls. It was like for me, always like trying to create whatever we are creating because I didn't have a budget. I always shot short films and like I'd never seen any director who has the guts to say, just break down. So that was kind of like, that's when I felt like that most probably. I was like, oh my God, can we break walls?
Well, I believe we've done a full circle from the start of your career back to the start of your career. So, Tolga, thank you so much for taking the time. And
it was pleasure.
Love the film. Everybody should look out for it. So, yeah, can't wait for everyone to see it.
Thank you.
We have this little tradition on the show where we start with a question about how our current guest found films or fell in love with them in the first place. I know it's not the most original, but so far it has resulted in some truly amazing stories, and I can't wait to hear yours.
Yeah. So I didn't really find filmmaking through watching films, because I didn't really watch that many films like growing up as a child. And my parents didn't watch movies that much. So, I wasn't like exposed to like watching movies at home, but they did take me to the theater to see plays and musicals a lot. So that had a big impression on me, which will make sense later in the story. But I kind of like, I was a really creative child and had a really active brain and always creating something, whether that was, my own stage play with the neighborhood kids or, my cousins or sister or, like a Barbie photo shoot or a circus that I made or a radio show. It was always something. And everything was like, like I said, like a big production. It was never just simple and scaled down. Very, I had to go all the way to the top. And so when I was around 10 or 12, my parents bought a home video VHS camcorder. And so that I got my hands on that, and it became another tool in the arsenal of things to play with. So I started to essentially, film the plays and the Barbie things, but Barbie photo shoots became, moving images. But I started to kind of create these little short films and make my sister, my cousins, or friends, be in them. And I became really just infatuated with that whole process. And, it was that kind of abstract concept of being behind the camera and creating something. And of course, at that time, I didn't know what a cinematographer was at all. And I grew up in a small town in South Louisiana. So there, was no film industry there, and still isn't. There is in Louisiana and like New Orleans and, they're bigger cities, but there wasn't even really that many films in the state going on, So I kind of like didn't know what to do with that. When it came time for high school, there was a photography class that I took, and that was all shooting on film, and we had a dark room, and that made a big impression on me. And and then when it came time to go to college, I got a scholarship to university relatively close to home, and I knew the abstract idea of like doing something in film was still with me, but there wasn't a film program there at the time. So the closest thing I could find to major in was mass communications, which is kind of more of a general kind of, broadcasting and some production and radio production and a lot of journalism stuff and writing. So not really like tapping into film, but graduated and I still didn't know what to do. So I took a job just not related to film at all, and just because I needed to pay the bills, and I was a store manager for a clothing store for a few years and really didn't love that job. But so quit one day because I just couldn't take it anymore. And after that, I had a friend who's like his dad or his dad's friend like worked at a TV station and they were looking for people. And so I got my foot in the door over there. It's a very small TV station in Louisiana. It wasn't quite news. It was more or less kind of like a local access or public access. Yeah, local access style. So I started working there. They ended up giving me my own show, which was kind of documentary based. And but I shot it and directed it and edited it and did everything more or less. And that I kind of look to as my film school. And I really learned so much over there because I was just, actively doing it every day. And, it still wasn't making movies, but, I learned a lot about telling stories, with the camera, and like literally I was the one putting them together in Final Cut Pro. And then finally, like when that job came to an end, Louisiana got its tax credits for film. So film started to come to the state, and I was able to get on my first film set through kind of some connections and people I met at one of the shows that I did at the TV station. And I worked as a camera assistant on that first movie. I was like the first/second AC. So I was like pulling focus and slating, and everyone was working for free. And it was like film summer camp. And it was an amazing experience for me because I really got a firsthand look at what the cinematographer did and really like, got introduced to that role. And I'm like, okay, I could see myself doing something like this. So through even more of a winding path, I started to pursue cinematography basically just by starting to shoot on my own short films with friends and stuff, and just kept shooting, everything I could get my hands on until people would pay me for it, and the projects slowly but surely got bigger, and here we are.
Love it. Steering our conversation a little bit closer to current days, coming off the success of Blackbird, how did you go into choosing your next project? What was your mindset like during that decision-making process?
Yeah, well, it's interesting because the concept of choosing your own project is not entirely like, you don't really get to choose. I mean, yes, you can say no and you can say yes, but it's kind of like you're responding to, what's presented to you at the time. And that's kind of what could be difficult at times as a cinematographer and, someone who's not creating, their own work, like a director would, maybe writer director. So it's really what's kind of on the table at the time. And, I had, like before Blackbird, I had done, a handful of indie films and larger budget commercials. And I was really just craving to level up on the narrative side and to just do something with a bigger budget. And so, leading up to Blackbird, I had gone on a series of interviews for films that were larger in scale, but it didn't work out with those films, which in retrospect, I'm so thankful it didn't, because Blackbird was a way better fit and just a project that I really resonated with. So, Blackbird really kind of just came out of the blue and the scripts fell into my lap. And that happened through a producer who gave my name to the team of Blackbird. And it was a producer who had worked with in commercials, actually. And so they looked up my work and responded to it, and we all hit it off. And it was a jump for me, but I felt really ready and prepared, and just to dive in head first. I think it was the combination of my independent films and the commercials with a larger budget and larger resources, and that prepared me for that experience. And yeah.
And in the case of the film at hand, The Shallow Tale, when you first got your hands on the script, did it already say The Shallow Tale of a writer who decided to write about a serial killer?
Yes. And I was like, there's no way that title is going to stick. But yes, it has. And I'm like, oh, this is great. I'm a serial killer DP, and but yeah, The Shallow Tale is a very different tone than Blackbird, very
Absolutely.
different kind of serial killer, and not, it's not true crime. It's not based on real events. And yeah, the script, I remember being such a fast read. It just really flowed on the page. And I was just like, wow, I haven't ever read anything like this. And I just can't wait to talk to this director. And who's this Tolga guy? And, I'd watched his other films after, and I'm like, wow, he really has such a wild imagination. And yeah, it was just, the script is such a ride. And these characters are just, out the box. And I thought it could be a really fun world. I mean, yes, it's grounded, like it's real, it's not fantasy, but it's a little off kilter and a little surreal at times.
I just spoke to Tolga yesterday.
Oh, great.
So
Cool.
basically now we can fact check everything he told me about you and your collaboration.
Perfect, yeah.
He told me about how, for the role of the DP, you were the first choice.
Mm.
Is this simply flattering, or does it carry additional pressure for you?
Yeah, I think it's really flattering. I don't know if I see it. I guess I was just honored that I was the first choice, that, right when we talked, we hit it off, and he responded to what I had to say. And yeah, I don't know if it necessarily added any pressure. I guess I just didn't think too much about it. It was like, okay, we click, because the interviews are like, I feel like it's a kind of two-way street. Like, yeah, the director is interviewing me, but I'm also kind of seeing if, like, we're compatible, and we would be good collaborators, and do we have a chemistry. So it felt like a good chemistry. It felt right. So it was just like, okay, yeah, we're going to go off on this journey together. So that's kind of how I looked at it.
And another thing he said is how one of the reasons for you two clicking is how both of you are control freaks.
Yeah.
Would you call this a positive for your work?
Yes and no. I think all DPs are, and all directors are. And I think that's why I've gravitated towards narrative filmmaking, narrative cinematography versus documentary. I did start off doing more documentaries, which was still a great foundation, but I like, having the control of building a world from nothing. But yeah, I think there are situations where you can go too far, and I've definitely caught myself on probably every project, and I try to learn from it, of doing too much, maybe that last thing, and I try to catch myself and step back and be like, okay, is there some light I can turn off, or is there a way, or did I turn too many lights off, or is there a way that I can pull back, because you never want to show your hand. And yeah, so I think things can run the risk of being overly manipulated. So it's always like finding that balance. But then I also think that's positive in, there's a positive side to being, meticulous and detail oriented and thorough, and prepping in a thorough way.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And was there, or is there a way you can turn this to your advantage?
I think so, because like I'm always I'm naturally, perfectionist, and for better or for worse. I think there's a lot of positives that come from it, and then also, like I was saying, just I have to check myself and try to recognize when maybe I've gone too far, because when things look too perfect, that doesn't always look good or realistic, or you don't maybe buy into it. But I think the way it can benefit is, by being kind of, I guess, very, meticulous and obsessive. It's just, I'm always trying to get better, and after a project, I try to be as objective as possible about my work and where I could have improved. And I analyze that, and I analyze the images that maybe are scenes that I don't feel good about, and interrogate that, and, ask myself, why? What is it about it? And then what things do I like, and why? And then try to work on those things. And I will, like, if there's something I need to work on, be obsessive about that, and research and experiment and test, in those areas to just try to improve in those aspects.
You got to film The Shallow Tale on location in New York. And as far as I know, it was quite an extensive shoot. How does the fact that you are actually there in place and you have the time to prep and then do as you planned, how does that expand your opportunity to express yourself artistically?
Well, we didn't have the time. We only had 21 days.
Really?
Yeah. So it was, no, we did not have time. I'll say that. Now, we did have a pretty good prep. I went in having 5 weeks. The production pushed a week. So I ended up with 6 weeks prep on the ground in New York with Tolga. So that was great. But as far as the shooting, I mean, it was every day was very stacked, and shooting in New York is quite difficult, especially on location. I think we had 1 week on a stage. So, that was nice to kind of settle in there. And we had a house in Harlem. We had about 4 or 5 days there at the beginning of the schedule. But everything else was kind of like a different location all over the city, in Brooklyn and Queens and, like I said, Harlem. So it was all over. We had a lot of driving stuff, which we did some practically, and then some on a car stage, which New York has this amazing car stage in Queens, I believe. And it's called the car stage. And it's basically kind of like a volume, like LED wall situation, like 3 walls and the 4th one on top, specifically to shoot cars. And that was my first time working at a car stage like that. And it was fantastic. And we went out, we shot our own plates. So we went out to the streets that our scenes took place on, and we shot all the plates. And one of the streets, which actually had a scene where the characters get out and it's raining and they're in and out of the car kind of thing. I lit that street for the plates. And so we went back on stage and shot it. We actually ended up having to shoot the car stage first, like day 1. It was supposed to be the last day, day 21. But the schedule had to get flipped for various reasons. So it was not ideal, because we wanted to shoot the practical locations first to establish everything that would be cut within it. But it actually ended up working out, and the car stage stuff it cuts in seamlessly with the rest of the practical driving stuff. Yeah, I think, with indie films, where the budget is small and you don't have much time to shoot, having the proper amount of prep is key. So thankfully we had a good amount of prep, especially like to plan out all of that car work. And those are the scenes and sequences that we storyboarded, because it was so involved, and, locations around the city, and the characters were inside the car and parked, and then they were driving, and then they were outside of the car. But then some of that was on the stage. So we really had to have a really tight plan as to what was being shot where. So that that prep time really helped with that. And then just having so many locations like spread out across the city, you're spending like half the amount of time in prep or more just scouting. You know, we had a cave, which was in upstate New York. So it was like over an hour, maybe even 2 hours away from the city. So that was the whole thing, just going there to scout and then factoring that into the shoot. Yeah, it was a tough one, but we were very lucky. We actually picture wrapped 24 hours before the SAG strike. So we just made it, and we were able to continue shooting through WGA just because Tolga isn't WGA and it was a non-WGA script. But yeah, so we just made it.
Well, shit.
Yeah.
Pardon my French. And New York is one of those cities, one of those very few locations that almost instantly turns into more than that, basically a character.
Yeah.
Plus, even though I said I'm not going to bring that up again, but another thing Tolga said to me is how many times even the blocking is done so that the three main characters are in a triangle. What's your starting point, and how do you see the finish line, plus, of course, everything in between as a cinematographer when the focus and object is obvious, like here, yet you have basically three main characters plus the city?
Coming up with the look was really inspired by New York City, and specifically like New York at night. And thinking about that concept, as I think Tolga and I talked about that, and thinking about New York at night and I guess just New York photographically in general made me look to a photographer that I love and has just some stunning photographs of the city, starting like in the 50s or 60s. Ernst Haas, and his use of color in his New York City work is spectacular. So I borrowed a lot from that in terms of palette. And I thought it could be, because this is a little kooky, off-kilter world with these just underground, Steve Buscemi's character, this retired serial killer, underground character, it lent itself to a little heightened look instead of just completely naturalistic. So I thought about the idea of letting the city, New York itself at night, ooze itself into the interior world, this world of Chalotale. And so manifest itself in the house of Keen and Susie, in the house in Harlem, and in the lamplights there. So maybe the tungsten lamps aren't pure, clean tungsten warm. They're a little dirty with green. And we actually came up with a nickname like Dirty Amber of that, or we had one like Dirty Moonlight, or just everything's like a little gritty. The colors are just slightly skewed. Nothing is pure. There's no pure white. And so that was the inspiration. I also looked at Robbie Mueller's work in the film American Friend, and there are his use of color just in general across his body of work is spectacular. But especially in American Friend, how kind of like that lime greenish almost color just shows up, and just kind of normal day-to-day interiors. There's this like kind of fluorescent lighting that pops up every now and then, and that's something that I wanted to infuse. So I borrowed a lot like palette and lighting wise, from those bodies of work, and let that inform the visual style of Chalotale. And then because it's such a dialogue heavy script, and it's a lot of two people or three people a lot of the times having really in-depth off the wall conversations. Tolga and I just found like it didn't make sense to like try to do anything crazy with the camera, like circling around or just doing, and it felt right to just kind of have a more classical approach. So, a lot of times we're inside the conversations, inside the triangle. Sometimes we're both, or outside and. But yeah, we did find ourselves a lot in that triangle of, Steve Buscemi and then and Britt and John, side by side, whether they're far apart, or sometimes John running, back and forth between the wife and Steve Buscemi. So, yeah.
We have a great deal of night sequences, which aren't like all the light and life is sucked out of it, but they are quite colorful, quite vivid. As you said as well, that the budget wasn't the highest. In that case, when lighting so many sequences, where do you reach regarding your previous works, and how much do you still learn through the process with your current project as new challenges come in?
Yeah, I mean, it's a lot of both, it's a lot of, yes, bringing past experiences into the current thing that I'm shooting and things that I've learned. And then, yeah, I'm always learning with everything that I shoot, whether it's, one day commercial or a feature film or a TV series. Because you're always like, every project requires a new problem to solve, a new story you're telling with new characters. You've never told this story before in these locations. You're always lighting a location for the very first time in a new world, in a new space. So there's always an element of discovery, and then always something, oh, okay, I see how this light reacts. You anticipate how you think it's going to work. And sometimes that surprises you, for better or for worse, So, yeah, I mean, there was a ton that I learned, and there was, I was playing with color. So that was fun to learn from, and just learn, okay, yeah, this works, this doesn't. These color combinations feel right in this particular space with this production design. And yeah, I get those kind of lessons.
And as we are wrapping up, my final question is going to be just as original as my first one, I must say. But what can I say? I love your work. And I mean, Blackbird somewhat filled the void that Mindhunter left behind. And for example, the Wolf of Snow Hollow is just the Wolf of Snow Hollow. I love it. And so what can you tell us about your future projects? Got anything lined up that you can talk about?
I don't think I could talk about it yet. But yeah, but yes, I hopefully will be doing a feature film soon, and that I'm really excited about. And yeah, so that would be the next thing. I've been doing most of this year, been shooting commercials, and yeah, I've just been so ready to dive into another long form project. So yeah, sorry, I wish I could talk about it more.
For now, all I get is the absolute excitement on your face. So can't wait to see what you do next. And Natalie, thanks for taking the time once again.
Of course, my pleasure. It was great to chat with you.